Today, Amy is going to be talking about climate change adaptation in San Diego County. So I'll just turn it over to you, Amy.
Great. Yeah. I mean, I'll try to keep this quick. Researchers are not really great at that, but this is a project that we have been working on with students here in San Diego for the past year and a half or so. And we are talking to farmers in San Diego County to understand if they're practicing agroforestry, and then how they might view that as far as potential climate change adaptation. And we are working with collaborators at NCAR, which is the National Center for Atmospheric Research, which is really fun because they've actually been modeling future climate projections in San Diego County, and we've been asking farmers about those specifically, which has been super fun. Kind of main research question. So how is San Diego County being impacted by extreme weather? And specifically, how are farmers being impacted by that, and what adaptations are they implementing? And then more specifically focused on agroforestry as a climate change adaptation strategy. So this is, before we dive into what we're doing, these are the different ways that we've classified agroforestry. So I just want to put this up front because it is different than a lot of the federal agencies classify agroforestry. We're using more of a broad international definition. So you'll see some of these are similar to how NRCS or other folks classify agroforestry, and some of these might be different. So we're using a bit broader net than a lot of the federal agencies do, and I'm more than happy to argue about that later or answer questions about that later. So what we did do some initial interviews with farmers throughout the county to get some ideas of what some of their challenges were. We then did the climate modeling, and then did a survey of farmers throughout the county. We ended up with about 119 usable surveys. There's approximately 5,000 farmers throughout the county, maybe less than that. And we sent out our survey to almost 1,000 farmers. And that's actually a pretty good response rate for an online survey. This was just an email survey through Qualtrics, and farmers, it was only about 15 minutes. It wasn't very long, but just trying to understand their perspectives with climate change and agroforestry. So if you're not familiar with San Diego County, the map here on the right shows basically where our respondents were from. So not so surprisingly, mostly Fallbrook, Valley Center, Escondido, Ramona, which is where most of the agriculture in San Diego County is, although we did find folks in more of the urban areas as well, including along the border, Lemon Grove and Encinitas, and some places that are a little more urban. Average age, 60. The average acres was 50, but that was a little bit skewed. I think the median was more like 7 or 8. Most farms in San Diego County are pretty small. And unlike a lot of places, farming in much of San Diego County is more of a full-time hobby for folks who also have real other jobs. So 24% of folks, only 24% of folks said farming was their main income, which is pretty in line with a lot of the Farm Bureau statistics. So a little bit different than other parts of the state. As far as agroforestry goes, 82%. So we sent our survey out to any and all farmers throughout the county, and about 82% of farmers checked yes to one of these agroforestry practices. You can see some of them were a lot higher than others in the graph, as far as regular dispersion of trees on cropland, which would mostly be things like orchards. That was up to 70% of farmers. We do have a lot of tree crops here. Around houses and public spaces, pollinator hedgerows, riparian forest buffers, living fences. So some of these are the USDA classifications, and these were around about 20% of farmers that we spoke with. And these were honestly very surprising results because they're really different than the US Census of Agriculture, which finds very small, like much smaller amounts of agroforestry throughout San Diego County. Although I think a lot of that difference is a difference in definition, which is something we're always struggling with agroforestry, is how to define it and how to classify it. So that might be some of the differences there. But we found a lot of folks are integrating trees into their farms around the county. As far as climate change impacts, this is one of the climate models that we showed as far as number of hot days. In our interviews, farmers talked quite a bit about being concerned with extreme heat and extremely hot days. So this is projected to increase by 2050. So we asked farmers then, based on projections of increased heat, what level of concern do you have for your different crops? And these are some of the most commonly planted crops and then the levels of concern. So what really stands out here to me is that folks were very concerned about avocados and extreme heat. And avocados are a major crop in San Diego County and one that's really being impacted by extreme heat. So that's kind of the big takeaway with that as far as the future concern in San Diego County with climate change. We also looked at not just extreme heat, but just average heat, basically. So it's projected that by 2050, the average temperature in San Diego County will increase by about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. So the question we asked with this information is, based on this information, what kind of adaptation strategies would you consider adopting on your farm? So if it's going to be 2 degrees hotter, what would you do differently, if anything? And these were the top adaptive strategies folks talked about. So not super surprisingly, irrigation came up a bit. That might be changing irrigation scheduling, type of irrigation. There's a lot of different ways that you could adapt your irrigation. Soil management also came up a lot. From our interviews, that is a lot to do with maintaining soil moisture. Things like mulching and cover cropping, we've seen a lot throughout the county. Transitioning to more resilient crop types or more diversified crop types came up quite a bit as well. So looking for, for example, types of avocado that do better in heat than others. And there were some of these, and that certainly could be agroforestry focused. The next two, mixed planting for increased biodiversity and pest and disease, this was also looking at agroforestry. So some of these are more related to agroforestry than others as far as just kind of general climate change adaptation. And then we just straight up asked directly, do you think agroforestry is an effective climate change adaptation tool? And about 62% of folks either somewhat agreed or agreed with that statement. There were folks that were kind of neutral, so that was about 24% of farmers, and then another 12% either somewhat disagreed or disagreed. And we're still working on this data, and this is one of the questions that we're currently working on, is who are these people? Who was more likely to agree and who was more likely to disagree, and did what crop they're planting or what type of agroforestry practice they're doing, did that impact their answer? So I have an undergrad student that is currently working on kind of digging into this data a little more, but still in general, most farmers, almost 2/3 of farmers, agreed generally with this statement. And then we also asked about different agroforestry benefits. So these were some of the benefits, more environmental type benefits. So do you agree that agroforestry can provide these benefits, or do you disagree, or do you feel kind of neutral? And some of these percentages are quite high, with almost 3/4 of farmers saying can help with pollination, soil health, soil moisture during drought. And really all of these responses were fairly popular as far as the different benefits from agroforestry that people were seeing from their trees. And a lot of these are related to climate change, right? So can help with the impacts of high temperatures, can help with shade, buffering during periods of flood, which does happen kind of locally around the county. So in general, farmers were seeing environmental benefits from agroforestry. And then the second half of questions we ask, these are more economic benefits or cultural benefits. And these numbers were generally lower. So folks were agreeing more with the environmental benefits than with some of these economic benefits. A lot of these percentages in the black bars, the agree, right, were a bit lower as far as if it helped lower costs or helped with market fluctuations or increased farm income. The biggest one here was farm aesthetics, right? Trees look nice on farms. Culture also came up quite a bit as far as practicing agroforestry or certain types or tree species were important to people's culture and heritage, which was really interesting. So the farm aesthetics and cultural aspect came up a bit. The economic stuff, fewer farmers agreed to. And I think that's basically it. So we're still working on this project, and we're actually doing a second component, which is doing some of the similar research, but applying it to a site in Tanzania in East Africa and seeing how farmers there think differently about agroforestry. So thank you. This research was funded by a lot of different agencies. So I have some of them on here as far as the National Science Foundation, USDA. I think, yes, great. It didn't take up too much time, so there's still some time for questions, but feel free to shoot me an email with any thoughts or questions or anything that you might have.